have seen low sensitivity and the place I work, and so I kind of can vibe with that. But like on another topic, I'm trying to like decriminalize weed here in Pennsylvania in State College. I don't know what your opinion is. Weed, yay or nay?
So decriminalization of weed, yay, weed, nay. Okay, meaning that I'm libertarian when it comes to weed. I will also say that the no.
I'm not going to attack you, bro. I'm not going to attack you.
I didn't think you were going to. You're high. Weed's a downer. So in any case, so to finish the thought, I'm for decriminalization of weed, but I find people who smoke weed to be losers. So that's my brief summation. Because it kills your brain cells and it's a waste of time. Jordan says, with the Portugal experimenting of decriminalization of all drugs being moderately successful, is legalizing and regulating any or all drug sales a viable way to help combat the power and wealth of gangs in cities like Chicago? I'm not for using drugs just against the black market. So, I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to drugs. There are certain drugs that cause externalities, like PCP makes people violent. That should be illegal. But if you're talking about drugs that you just take and it makes you high and you ruin your life, that's really your business as long as I'm not paying for it. The big problem with decriminalization of drugs is you have to ensure that the decriminalized price of drugs is below the street market price of drugs. So one of the problems we have in California is you decriminalize marijuana, but the price that you get at the marijuana dispensary is still higher than black market marijuana, so people still buy on the black market. You haven't destroyed the black market. You just created a black market that is in competition with the real market. In order to really do this, it would work, actually, decriminalization of drugs, there's a good case to be made that decriminalization of drugs would actually work better on the level of harder core drugs that are more expensive rather than cheaper drugs. That would actually be the case, the strong case, the economic case for decriminalization. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Over the last couple of days, Joe Biden has been out there talking, and one of the things he's been talking about is what he likes to call the cancer moonshot. Well, I didn't know cancer was on the moon, but there you have it. So the cancer moonshot. This is the idea that we're going to spend inordinate amounts of federal money in order to research cancer treatments and end cancer. We'll listen to Joe Biden talk about it for a second, then I'll tell you what I don't like about this. Here's Joe Biden.
I've committed, and I promise before we leave, we will mow down any of the impediments that exist bureaucratically in the federal government to slow up the process.
So cooperation is one key. Money is a key. And I know that you've asked for $1 billion.
And we will get $1 billion because this is I've been doing this a long time. This is a truly bipartisan issue.
Okay, so it's a bipartisan issue. You'll get lots and lots of money. The barrier, there's always this idea on the left, and it's easy to fall into on the right too, that all the differences between us curing cancer and not curing cancer is just throwing money at the problem from a federal government perspective. It isn't true. It isn't true. There are certain areas in which the federal government is useful and good, although they screw it up a lot too, like vaccinations, for example, production of vaccinations during an emergency. There have been times in American history where we've gone into production on vaccines and it's been a complete waste of time, like in the 1970s. When it comes to cancer, first of all, people think of cancer as one disease. It isn't. It's an enormous spectrum of diseases. There are many different types of cancer. I'm speaking as somebody, my aunt died at 42 of cancer, of breast cancer. My other aunt had a preliminary double mastectomy because she was afraid of getting cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. My father has had a melanoma. Like, this is, this is something that everybody in the United States has experienced. What I'm saying here is I don't like the idea that government is God, and if we just give it enough power, it'll cure cancer for us. It's not true. Okay, what's actually going to cure cancer is not the kind of things the federal government is doing, but the things that the federal government hates on, like the pharmaceutical companies, the drug companies that actually produce the research that leads to practical results. So what the federal government does, they fund grants. My wife works in the medical industry. She's worked at a lab. This is true. They fund grants. The grants are for broad-based research. The idea is supposed to be that this broad-based research is then used to create the drugs that we use to treat the disease. That is very infrequent. Usually the way medicines are developed is that it's trial and error, right? This is why you have animal trials. It's not like, oh, we're going to go at it conceptually, a priori, blank slate. We just come in, tabula rasa, and we just create it out of our mind. Instead, what it is here's a cancer. We know it exists. Let's try a bunch of different things on it and see what works. That's how medicine is stumbling through the dark. Science is stumbling through the dark. That's why the scientific method of hypothesis and failure is the way it is. It's not come up with a great idea in your head and then later see if it works. It's we try it. If it fails, we come up with another hypothesis. If it fails, we come up with another hypothesis. So even from that perspective, the idea of mass federal funding is actually a relatively large waste of money. Certainly the idea of punishing pharmaceutical companies, which is so near and dear to Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, and probably to Donald Trump as well. This idea is actually horrible because those pharmaceutical companies create the exact drugs that you are going to need if, God forbid, something happens.
Message. Ben, I read something like that, Donald Trump saying this should not happen, and I think that has a chilling effect for artistic expression. After all, these performers were up on stage, they were performing art, even when they were speaking to the vice president-elect. Do you agree?
Oh, well, I mean, it isn't my favorite thing.
Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it isn't my favorite thing, and I would recommend that, you know, conservatives who look at President Trump doing this, President-elect Trump doing this, and saying, well, it seems okay to me, just imagine if the shoe were on the other foot for a second and it were Barack Obama lecturing NASCAR fans if he got booed at some sort of NASCAR event. You know, it doesn't seem totally appropriate for the President-elect of the United States to be doing this. On the other hand, you know, I would recommend that the media sort of take a second look at how much focus they put on things like this, because the fact is that if you're going to turn it all the way up to 11 on a Hamilton tweet, yeah, this is going to be a long presidency for all of you.
Is that what you think happened on Saturday and again today? We've turned it up to 11?
Yeah, I think that you guys have been. I think the mainstream media has been at 11 since the election, and I think that you know that means that there's no place to turn it from there. I mean, this is sort of the problem in the 2016 election. I think there are a lot of aspersions cast at Mitt Romney. And then when you came back in 2016 and cast the same aspersions at Donald Trump, who's a very different candidate, a lot of people just tuned it out. I really think that the media is in danger of blowing its credibility if they're going to be so exuberant about covering every aspect of Trump's foibles, because there are going to be some things he does that are actually probably not very good, and you're going to want people to pay attention to it. And if you pay the same amount of attention to a Hamilton tweet that you do for example, something I think is significantly more troubling, you know, President-elect Trump meeting with business partners from India while he's the President-elect, you know, that seems to me something where you ought to be putting more focus if you're going to actually, you know, point out problems here.
Charles, do you agree? And Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of thedailywire.com. Welcome to all three of you. Charles, do you believe this is a strategy by President-elect Trump? Does he purposely post these sorts of things, get people all riled up in order to distract people from real controversies?
Not necessarily. I mean, I just think it's a compulsion. He really, I mean, he's consumed. What you have to remember is this is a guy from Queens who wanted to be in New York City. His whole kind of social orbit is the New York City orbit, right? So that's why he still kind of positions himself in New York City media. That's why he attacks the New York Times. That's why he attacks SNL. That's why he's attacking a Broadway show. The New York Times put together this amazing list of all the people he had attacked. Take a look at that list and see how many of those personalities are people who are right here in New York City. It's almost as if he's not completely moved into the realm of being president of the entire United States. He's still obsessed about New York City, and then that includes New York City media.
Well, Selena, you've been talking to voters about this, actually asking them about Hamilton this weekend. Do voters where you are in Pennsylvania and Ohio, do they care about this Hamilton controversy?
Well, I went out into Youngstown, Ohio yesterday and talked to a number of voters, and I specifically talked to Democrats who voted for Clinton and asked them how they felt about it. And while they had no problem with the speech that was given afterwards, they did have a problem with the booing. They thought it was disrespectful, and that they think that more respect should have been shown to him as a guy just going to see a play.
So booing by the audience members when Pence walked into the room. Let me pull up, of course, Trump's famous Twitter feed here. And let's pull up one of his tweets from yesterday about this. We can put it on screen, one of his first comments about this controversy. He said the following. He said, our wonderful future VP Mike Pence was harassed last night at the theater by the cast of Hamilton, cameras blazing. And then he said, this should not happen. He's not talking about the booing there. He's talking about the cast members' message. Ben, I read something like that, Donald Trump saying this should not happen, and I think that has a chilling effect for artistic expression. After all, these performers were up on stage, they were performing art, even when they were speaking to the vice president-elect. Do you agree?
Oh, well, I mean, it isn't my favorite thing.
Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it isn't my favorite thing, and I would recommend that, you know, conservatives who look at President Trump doing this, President-elect Trump doing this, and saying, well, it seems okay to me, just imagine if the shoe were on the other foot for a second and it were Barack Obama lecturing NASCAR fans if he got booed at some sort of NASCAR event. You know, it doesn't seem totally appropriate for the President-elect of the United States to be doing this. On the other hand, you know, I would recommend that the media sort of take a second look at how much focus they put on things like this, because the fact is that if you're going to turn it all the way up to 11 on a Hamilton tweet, yeah, this is going to be a long presidency for all of you.
Is that what you think happened on Saturday and again today? We've turned it up to 11?
Yeah, I think that you guys have been. I think the mainstream media has been at 11 since the election, and I think that you know that means that there's no place to turn it from there. I mean, this is sort of the problem in the 2016 election. I think there are a lot of aspersions cast at Mitt Romney. And then when you came back in 2016 and cast the same aspersions at Donald Trump, who's a very different candidate, a lot of people just tuned it out. I really think that the media is in danger of blowing its credibility if they're going to be so exuberant about covering every aspect of Trump's foibles, because there are going to be some things he does that are actually probably not very good, and you're going to want people to pay attention to it. And if you pay the same amount of attention to a Hamilton tweet that you do for example, something I think is significantly more troubling, you know, President-elect Trump meeting with business partners from India while he's the President-elect, you know, that seems to me something where you ought to be putting more focus if you're going to actually, you know, point out problems here.
Charles, do you agree?
I think you have to just constantly call out everything. But
doesn't that raise, as Ben saying, raise the volume to 11 at all times?
Yeah, but I am so personally offended by so much of what he does. And you make a really strong point about, you know, artistic expression and allowing that to live and breathe, and not try to put your thumb on the scale of that as the President of the United States. That's a real point. That is not a small thing, right? And as a person who lives here in New York City, who goes to Broadway, who's gone to see Hamilton, and it is not overrated, it is actually a great show.
I do think Donald Trump needs to go and see Hamilton, by the way. I'm very serious. I think he needs to go and see Hamilton.
But you know, I think that there's a real need for all of us to put constant pressure on this man to make him live up to the ideals of the presidency itself. And I'm obviously an opinion journalist. I'm not a straight news reporter, and they have a different mission as a straight news reporter. But people like me, the country needs us right now to put pressure on him, because we have to make him be the president. He is going to be president for 4 years, and he has to conform to that in some way. He can't do things like this and not have it called out. It just can't happen.
So let me ask you, do you buy that? I mean, one of the reasons why you're here with us, one of CNN's newest contributors, is that you had a much better understanding of what was going on in voters' minds during the election season. You were speaking with voters in the Rust Belt on a daily basis. I'm really thankful CNN's brought you on board as a contributor, because we need to hear much more from voices outside D.C. and New York and the Acela corridor. So let me ask you, do you think folks out there, outside the New York, D.C. bubble, do believe that they need journalists right now? Do they believe in what we think here on CNN?
Well, I think that, and thank you for that nice introduction, but I do think that that's important, and that was sort of missed in this election cycle, that they didn't think that people not just were talking to them, because plenty of reporters went into events in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan, but being there and living there and listening to them, I think that was the most important component that we need to learn from this election, is listening to everyone, and I think this is a good start.
Well, they want to be heard, but do those voters, do ordinary voters who probably haven't seen Hamilton, do they care about journalists trying to stand up and be more adversarial in this moment and hold the president-elect accountable, or does all of that just come across as media bias?
Well, it's not just media bias. I think when you look at Trump's most recent tweets, it's not just really about media, but it's about pop culture and culture's perception of America outside of New York City, right? So they like that tension. I think that even though, and back to your thing about standing up to Trump, I think viewers and voters always expect reporters, even if they don't like what we do, to challenge the status quo and to challenge, because our job is to bring them the news and have them understand what is happening.
To challenge